Ever feel like you want to really wrap your head around something big, something complex, like you want to get right to the heart of it, but you don't want to get totally lost in a sea of information?
Totally.
Well, that's exactly what we're going for in this deep dive today.
Yeah.
We're going to unpack this whole idea of giftedness,
Right.
all the different shapes and sizes it comes in, and sometimes how it can
Yeah.
show up alongside some, well, maybe unexpected challenges, especially when it comes to learning.
Absolutely. And for this deep dive, we've got a really cool mix of stuff to work with, too. Like, we've got these articles that get your imagination going.
Oh, cool.
And then personal stories, too. Real
Yeah.
people talking about their experiences with learning differences like, dyscalculia.
Right.
And we're also looking into what it takes to be an amazing teacher
Yeah.
for these gifted students, how those skills develop, how come some bright kids end up getting the wrong label, and then what's actually happening inside those gifted brains, the science of it.
Oh.
We're even going to peek into the social and emotional world of these individuals.
Interesting.
Plus, we've got like these focused modules that really nail down like the definition of giftedness and what it means to be twice exceptional, or 2E as they call it.
So lots to cover. Our mission then is to kind of sift through all of this, pull out those golden nuggets, and give you a much clearer picture of what giftedness is all about, especially when it bumps up against other conditions.
Yeah.
All that without making your head spin.
Exactly. Make it digestible.
All right, so let's dive in. When we're talking about giftedness, like what are the fundamental ideas to keep in mind? What's at the core of this?
I think a really great place to start is with this guy, Renzulli.
Okay.
He had this way of thinking about giftedness that's really helpful, I think. So he said it's not just about being super good at something like having above average ability. It's also about creativity and having that drive to stick with things, that task commitment. You really need all three of those pieces working together, he said, not just like high test scores or whatever.
Right. It's got to be about how you use those abilities with passion and originality.
It's about putting that potential into action, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And then we were looking at Gardner, too. He kind of expands our whole understanding of intelligence, doesn't he?
He totally does. Gardner's theory, multiple intelligences, is
Right.
a big shift away from that old idea that there's just one kind of intelligence, measured by IQ.
Yeah.
He said, nope, there's all these different ways of being smart, and he came up with like these categories.
Okay.
So you've got your verbal linguistic, that's your word smarts, right? Then there's visual spatial. Those are folks who think in pictures and spaces.
Excellent.
Then there's the logical mathematical kind, obviously. Music, understanding your body and how it moves. Kinesthetic, bodily. Understanding other people, interpersonal. Understanding yourself, that's interpersonal.
Yeah.
And even being tuned into nature, like the naturalist intelligence. So I'm thinking, with all these different strengths, how does that play into how someone learns best? Or how a teacher can kind of tailor their approach to each kid?
Well, it's all about playing to those strengths, right?
Yeah.
Like if someone's super verbal, then discussions and storytelling, writing, those are going to be their jam. But someone who learns visually, you got to bring in diagrams, models, all those visual aids.
Right.
And then the logical mathematical folks, they might thrive on experiments and problem solving, that kind of stuff.
Makes sense.
It's all about recognizing each person's way of being smart and adjusting, how you present information and even how they get to show what they've learned.
So beyond those models, if you were just observing someone, what are some common things you might notice in someone who's gifted?
Well, you'll often see them picking up new stuff super fast, like a sponge.
Right.
And they remember it. They're curious, like intensely curious, always asking questions, wanting to dig deeper,
Yeah.
They might have a vocabulary that's way ahead of their age. A lot of times they've got a great sense of humor, too.
Oh, that's interesting.
And they tend to be pretty independent in how they think and approach learning. Often they'll have a bunch of interests, and sometimes it seems like those interests have nothing to do with each other.
I've heard the phrase walking encyclopedia before. Is that still a thing?
Kind of a funny way to put it, right?
Yeah.
It gets at the idea of having all this knowledge stored up, but
Yeah.
it doesn't really capture the whole picture, does it?
No.
Like all that creativity and drive we talked about, it's missing those parts.
Yeah, it's like reducing a complex person to just how much they know.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, one of the sources mentioned this term, aptitudes sobresalientes, in the context of education in Mexico. What's that about?
Oh, right. So aptitudes sobresalientes means outstanding aptitudes. And it's the term they use in Mexican education to recognize those folks who show like high abilities or potential in different areas. It's a pretty broad term, and it lines up with the idea that giftedness isn't just one thing. It can show up in all sorts of talents and potentials.
Gotcha. So we've got a good foundation for what giftedness is. Now I'm curious about the brain stuff. What's going on in those gifted brains?
Oh, this is where it gets really cool.
Uh,
Researchers have actually found some interesting connections between how the brain's structured and how intelligence shows up.
okay.
Early on, they were looking at overall brain size. You know, there seemed to be a link with intelligence. But now, with better imaging and all that, they're seeing that certain parts of the brain seem to be key players.
Hmm.
Like there's this area called the anterior cingulate cortex and the frontal cortices, which are involved in testing ideas, understanding information, and making decisions.
Okay.
In gifted individuals, these areas are often more active or larger. Same with the parietal and temporal lobes, which are important for like processing sensory input and language. So it's not just about a bigger brain overall, it's about these specific areas being like super engaged.
So it's not just about size, it's about how these different parts are working together, the connections.
Right, exactly. And if you look at folks who are incredibly gifted in math, for instance, research has shown that white matter is super important. Think of white matter as the brain's communication network, all those wires that connect different areas.
Okay.
They found that a bigger corpus callosum, that's the main connection between the two halves of the brain, allows for faster information sharing between those hemispheres.
Like a superhighway for information.
Right, like having a faster internet connection in your brain. And there are stronger connections between the front of the brain and deeper areas in the back, too. These pathways seem to be essential for problem solving, holding information in mind while you work with it, what they call working memory, and even creativity in mathematical thinking.
That's amazing. Like their brains are wired for these kinds of thinking. What about emotional intelligence? Our sources talked about that too.
Yeah, and this is where this specific pathway comes in, the right uncinnated fasciculus. It's really important for emotional intelligence and empathy, how we understand and share other people's feelings. Research suggests this pathway might be more developed in gifted folks, which could explain why they often have such heightened sensitivity and empathy.
Hmm.
So it's not just about being intellectually brilliant, it's about having this capacity for deep emotional understanding, too.
So giftedness isn't just about the cognitive stuff, but also like fundamental differences in how they experience the world at a neurological level.
Exactly. And a lot of gifted individuals, they talk about feeling different, like how they take in sensory information that might be more intense for them. Social situations can be tricky. Their experience of emotions can be really profound. They often process information really quickly. They need that intellectual stimulation, and their memory might work in a different way too. These differences, they're part of what makes them gifted, but they can also lead to misunderstandings and even challenges for both the individuals and the people around them.
And this takes us to a really important idea, twice exceptionality. 2E for short. Can you break down what that actually means?
Yep. Twice exceptionality is when someone is both gifted in some areas and has another challenge. It could be a learning disability, ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, a processing disorder, an emotional or mental health condition, or even a physical disability. So you've got this mix of really high potential and a significant hurdle that impacts how they learn and navigate the world.
It seems like recognizing 2E individuals could be tough. How do those two sets of characteristics, how do they interact?
That's the tricky part. One set can often mask the other. So imagine a kid with incredible verbal skills. They might be able to compensate for, say, difficulties with reading or writing for quite a while. Their amazing comprehension gets them through those early literacy tasks, and their struggles with actually decoding words or writing down their thoughts, it doesn't become obvious until later when the academic demands ramp up.
Makes sense.
And then on the flip side, you might have a kid with a really obvious learning disability or behavioral issue, and their giftedness in another area gets completely overlooked. Everyone focuses on fixing the problem, the deficit, and they miss those amazing strengths hiding underneath.
You brought up the example of a kid who's brilliant verbally but struggles with writing, and they get labeled as lazy.
Oh yeah, that's a classic example. People assume, well, if they're so smart, why aren't they trying harder with their writing? They think it's about effort, not a real neurological difference affecting their motor skills for writing. And that's where understanding asynchronous development is so important. These kids, their intellectual growth can be way ahead of their development in other areas, like those fine motor skills for writing or their ability to focus their attention.
Right.
And that gap, it can be really frustrating. They've got these brilliant ideas, but they can't get them out easily. And that can lead to them hating tasks they might actually enjoy if they didn't have that struggle.
So how do we best support these 2E learners, both teachers and parents?
Vygotsky's idea, the zone of proximal development, or the ZPD, it's really key here. The ZPD is kind of like that sweet spot where a learner can do something with the right support.
Okay.
So for 2E kids, they need to be challenged in their gifted areas to keep them engaged and growing, but they also need that scaffolding, that temporary support to help them overcome those challenges from the disability, all within that building.
Right.
Right. It's not enough to just focus on fixing the weakness. You got to build on their strengths while giving them strategies and tools to work around those challenges.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about recognizing and nurturing both their potential and addressing those learning needs so they can truly thrive and not get stuck underachieving.
Let's get into some specific learning disabilities that often show up alongside giftedness. We have this really powerful story about dyscalculia.
Yeah, this mom was sharing her experience with her daughter, who was clearly gifted in a lot of ways, but she had such a hard time with math. It was heartbreaking.
Wow.
What's striking is that at first, nobody even considered a learning disability. She was amazing in language arts and other subjects, so they identified her as gifted.
Yeah.
But she struggled so much with basic math facts, mathematical concepts. It was just constant tears and frustration.
Oh, man.
It wasn't until they started looking into dyscalculia specifically that it all clicked. Dyscalculia is a learning disability that affects math abilities. And the emotional impact on this bright girl was huge. She started doubting her own intelligence, feeling like she wasn't good enough. It just shows how important early identification is. Once they had a diagnosis, the school could give her accommodations.
Yeah.
She could move forward in her strong areas and get the support she needed in math.
It's a good reminder that being gifted doesn't make you immune to these learning differences. What about dysgraphia? That seems to be another big hurdle for 2E kids.
It is, and it's really important to understand that dysgraphia is a neurological thing. It affects the physical act of writing. It's not just messy handwriting.
Right.
For these individuals, forming letters, organizing their thoughts on paper, it's super difficult. And their writing doesn't reflect their amazing ideas. The recommendation, especially if they're still struggling a lot by 3rd grade or even earlier if it's severe, is to really move away from emphasizing handwriting and focus on technology, like keyboarding. Obviously, working on legible handwriting is still important, but tech becomes the main tool for written expression.
That don't get bogged down, right?
Exactly. They can actually get those thoughts out there.
The sources were really clear about the potential for some serious emotional consequences if dysgraphia isn't addressed properly. Increased stress, depression, even suicidal thoughts. That's scary stuff.
It is. Imagine a child whose amazing inner world is trapped because they can't get it out on paper.
Yeah.
They get constant negative feedback, their self-esteem takes a hit, their mental well-being suffers. There was this example of Alex, a student with Asperger's and severe dysgraphia.
Okay.
She just blossomed when they gave him a supportive workstation in the classroom with all the technology he needed.
Oh, wow.
Having that dedicated space with the right tools can make a world of difference.
So the right support can really turn things around. Now, ADHD seems to be increasingly diagnosed in women. How does that intersect with giftedness?
It's an important trend to be aware of. ADHD in women often presents differently than in boys. It's often the inattentive type, so you see things like disorganization, forgetfulness, trouble starting and staying focused on tasks. And it can be easily missed. People might just think she's scatterbrained or not trying hard enough.
Yeah.
The thing is, ADHD is neurodevelopmental. It's there from birth, often genetic, and it's not the same as those attention problems that come from, like, pandemic stress or too much screen time.
Right.
And for a lot of women who finally get that diagnosis, treatment can be life-changing.
Oh, wow.
They finally start gaining control in areas where they've struggled for so long.
And for those who are both gifted and have undiagnosed ADHD, it seems like their intellectual abilities might actually help them hide those ADHD challenges.
You're right. Their quick thinking, their grasp of concepts, it might make it seem like they're doing fine academically.
Yeah.
But underneath, those organizational and executive functioning struggles, they're still there.
Yeah.
They might have trouble finishing long-term assignments, managing time, staying organized. It can be this frustrating cycle of high potential that doesn't always translate into consistent results.
We've talked about how learning disabilities can get missed in gifted kids, but our sources also brought up misdiagnosis, like when those gifted characteristics get mistaken for something else entirely.
Oh yeah, this is so important. Sometimes those very traits we associate with giftedness can be misinterpreted, like rapid learning, hating repetitive tasks, That can be seen as impatience or defiance, leading to an ADHD or oppositional defiant disorder label.
Mm.
Their advanced vocabulary, their vast knowledge.
Yeah.
Someone might think they're argumentative or a know-it-all. Their independence, their deep focus, that could be mistaken for social isolation or even something obsessive.
Wow.
There was actually a helpful table in one of the sources that outlined all these potential misinterpretations of gifted characteristics.
So they get the wrong label and then they don't get the right kind of help. And then there's masking too, these
Right.
kids hiding their abilities.
Masking is a real thing. Some gifted kids, they intentionally underachieve in school, downplay their passions and talents just to fit in. There was this study that mentioned kids with IQs over 160 actually adjusting their reading performance in class to match the average level.
Really?
Wow. Like they're wearing this mask to avoid standing out, being rejected.
Yeah.
But hiding their true selves all the time can lead to feeling isolated. And they might even create these alternate personas to navigate social situations.
It must be exhausting to hide such a big part of yourself. What happens when someone does that for a long time, this masking? What are the long-term effects?
Well, they can end up with this huge internal conflict.
Right.
It can mess with their sense of self, make it hard to figure out their own identity. If you're always suppressing who you are, pretending, it's hard to know what you truly value, what you really want.
Yeah.
And it makes it tough to form real, authentic relationships based on true understanding and acceptance.
So it's clear that the social and emotional side of things is huge for gifted individuals.
It really is. It's not just about academics. There's this concept called intellectual overexcitability. It describes this intense thirst for knowledge, this constant questioning, this deep need to analyze and understand the world. And this intensity, it can make them feel out of sync with their peers, who might not have those same burning questions, that same intellectual curiosity. Then there's developmental asynchrony, too. Their intellectual maturity might be way ahead of their social and emotional development.
Okay.
That can make it hard to connect with kids their own age who are into different things who just don't get it.
Yeah, I can see that.
There was this idea from Hollingworth about socially optimal intelligence. She suggested that there's an IQ range around 125 to 155 where social integration tends to be smoother. But those with really high IQs, above 160, they might end up more isolated just because of the huge differences in their cognitive development.
It's like they're on a different wavelength.
Exactly.
Besides social challenges, what other emotional things come up a lot with gifted individuals?
Well, they often have this heightened emotional sensitivity and empathy.
Oh, interesting.
They can be deeply affected by the suffering of others, by injustice, and that can lead to a lot of stress and anxiety.
Yeah.
You combine that with all the pressures they feel, both internal and external, and it makes the rise in suicidal thoughts among young people especially concerning.
It's so sad to think about kids going through that.
It is, and those risk factors like depression, family problems, bullying, feeling misunderstood, those can be even more intense for gifted kids who already feel different.
Right.
It's so important to be aware of those warning signs.
Absolutely. Now, our sources also talked about some of the less healthy ways gifted individuals might cope.
Right, when they feel like they don't belong anywhere, they might look for acceptance in the wrong places. Like the sources mentioned cults or those more negative sides of urban tribes. These groups can sometimes offer a sense of belonging, of being understood, especially if you feel like an outsider everywhere else.
But it's a dangerous path.
It can be, yeah.
So we've talked about the challenges. What can we actually do to better support these gifted and 2E kids?
Oh, there are so many ways. To nurture imagination, you got to provide stimulating environments and encourage exploration. For 2E students, it's all about compensatory strategies, teaching them how to work around those weaknesses by using their strengths.
Okay.
And teachers, especially those who work with gifted kids, they need special training, a deep understanding of those unique cognitive, social, and emotional needs.
Right.
Plus, they got to be culturally sensitive, too, to reach those kids from all different backgrounds.
Yeah, that's crucial.
It's all about meeting them where they are.
So what kind of learning environments, what kind of teaching works best?
You got to create spaces that are safe, but also intellectually stimulating, where these kids feel seen and accepted for who they are.
Makes sense.
Give them choices in how they learn and how they show what they know. Use a variety of teaching techniques and materials to reach those different learning styles. There was this one suggestion I thought was interesting. Teach them the language of different subjects,
Oh, interesting.
like the specific terminology, the way each field thinks.
Right.
and even use events from completely different areas to compare how problems are solved.
Mm,
That helps them see patterns, make connections across different subjects.
cool.
Another thing they kept coming up was the importance of connecting with intellectual peers.
Yeah, I was going to say that seems to be a big theme in our sources.
It's huge. For these kids, finding those kindred spirits, those people who get their intensity, who share their curiosity, is crucial.
Yeah.
It's good for their social and emotional well-being,
Hmm.
helps them develop a strong sense of self, that feeling of belonging, of being understood. It helps fight that sense of isolation.
Right, right.
And then just fostering self-acceptance in general,
Hmm.
that's huge. Especially for girls and women, it's important to address those societal biases they might face.
Yeah.
Encourage their confidence, give them positive role models and mentors.
One of our sources had a really cool way of describing the difference between a typical student and a highly gifted one.
Oh yeah, I like that one.
Uh,
It was about knowing the answers versus asking the questions.
right.
It really gets at that deeper level of inquiry, that critical thinking, that constant curiosity that you see in highly gifted individuals.
You're not just absorbing information, they're actively exploring, questioning everything.
Exactly. They want to understand the why behind everything.
So what about when those gifted kids seem to lack motivation? How do we re-spark that fire?
Well, it can come from a lot of things we've talked about.
Okay.
Like maybe the work isn't challenging enough, or they're
Hmm.
trying too hard to fit in, or they just don't see the point of what they're learning.
Right.
The first step is to really figure out why they're not motivated.
Hmm.
Start there. And then you got to start teaching them at their level, make connections to their interests so they can transfer that motivation. Use positive reinforcement, build those strong relationships with them.
Hmm.
Avoid sarcasm or putting them down, and give them genuine recognition for their efforts. Teaching them how to set goals, how to persevere, that's important too.
It was really powerful to read those comments from gifted individuals about the people who made a difference in their lives. What were some of the things they emphasized?
A lot of them talked about the importance of support, feeling accepted, and being seen as competent. They mentioned mentors and teachers who asked those thought-provoking questions without talking down to them, who made them feel capable and valued.
Hmm.
And those teachers who genuinely loved learning themselves, that really rubbed off on them. Those positive relationships can create a lifelong love of learning.
Okay, so final question. Based on all this, what are the big takeaways for how we design curriculum for gifted learners?
Well, first, the curriculum needs to acknowledge their thirst for knowledge, their need to make progress, to go deep into topics. It's got to recognize their ability to make connections, their high standards for themselves, their creativity, and that drive to ask questions, to seek deeper understanding.
Right, right.
That means moving away from just memorizing facts and giving them chances to do big projects, independent research, solve complex problems. And it means being aware of their sensitivities, sensory, emotional, intellectual, imaginative, intuitive, and teaching them how to handle those sensitivities.
Okay.
We talked about the premises and requirements for genius.
Yeah.
It really emphasizes how important it is to give them that ongoing intellectual stimulation, those chances to really focus on their work, to develop strong observation skills, to aim high, to be creative, and to look for those underlying principles and generalizations.
Hmm.
We need to help them build those habits of highly effective gifted learners. Setting goals, considering different perspectives, actively searching for resources. And then there are the recommendations from NXPAS, the Mexican Association, for supporting outstanding individuals. They have some practical strategies like grouping gifted students together for certain activities, offering accelerated learning, advanced placement, differentiating the content, the process, and how they show what they've learned, and creating that interdisciplinary curriculum that connects everything.
Wow, that's a lot to think about. So we covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into giftedness and 2E. Just to recap, what are the big takeaways you want our listeners to walk away with?
First, remember that giftedness is complex.
Okay.
It's a mix of abilities, creativity, and dedication. And it shows up in many different ways, like Gardner showed us. It's also crucial to recognize that 2E folks, they've got these amazing talents and then these challenges alongside them, and it takes a thoughtful approach to support their growth.
Right.
Their social and emotional well-being is super important, just as important as their academic progress. It's all about recognizing and nurturing that unique potential in each person, giving them the support they need for those challenges so they can truly thrive.
And on that note, here's a final thought for you to chew on. How can we, as a society, do a better job of understanding and supporting those with exceptional minds? How can we make sure they can use their talents without feeling like they have to hide who they are or deal with being misdiagnosed? It really makes you think about all the different ways intelligence and potential can show up and how important it is to look beyond those traditional ways of measuring ability.
We hope you'll keep exploring these ideas. Maybe look into 2E more, check out resources on gifted education, or just reflect on your own experiences with learning and all the different ways human potential can express itself.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks for joining us.